As they discussed, the group emerged from the final antechamber cavern, all three blinking to reach the upper sunlit world. It was midday. The desert all about the base of Mount Ellisbohr was scattered with the corpses of orcs. The trolls they had released not so long ago were dead as well, their remains smoldering into giant piles of hot ash. Toril had brought a contingent of some 300 cavalrymen. Neat rows of tents were set up a fair distance from the dead bodies, which were being piled up and burned in orderly rows. The acrid smell of burnt flesh filled the air. Toril directed the group to an adjutant who took them to a nearby tent. Toril remained, hearing reports and giving orders. Nima, who had been considering how to answer Bruckner's questions about her own plans, finally said,
I am in search of good works to perform, so I suppose I will go wherever it appears there is something good to be done. I cannot sound more eager about it. It would not be correct to say that I feel anything like eagerness or even willingness regarding this purpose. I'm afraid I lack the trust and the deservedness of others that you seem to possess, and which would make these efforts palatable. But past events have drawn me to the conclusion that it might be in my own best interest to break with my long habit of concern only for myself and my own survival.
She gave a wry smile, aware of the contradiction in that last statement, and then continued,
Unfortunately, I don't seem to have much of a natural grace in the art of good deeds. I mentioned to you my unfortunate last attempt which landed me in prison. It was for this reason that I asked you about the king. I am afraid that, if what you suspect is correct, I have once again thwarted my own efforts at doing a service to another by delivering him so readily to those who might perhaps deal him damage, without questioning whether or not I should have.
I fear that may be so. The demoness did not choose the king by chance, and she would not have been able to take him without help from those close to the court. I said that I don't know if Janison is a good man or a bad one, but he is a king, and a man's duty is to serve his king, if he can. Those who will not serve have no honor. Those who would betray their king hate honor. Janison is not my king, but I cannot find it in my heart to abandon any king to such people. But we do not know yet what will be asked of us, and I doubt the king's fate will be left in our hands, if it ever was. Look, here's Toril.
Well, you three are quite the heroes of the day. I'm sure the general will be awaiting your report, and the lords as well. General Alexander indicated that if we found the king, we were to convene at Eltuhlich for the Lady Carrillo and the lords to assess the situation and decide upon the best course of action. Seeing as how it's you that's found him, I've no doubt they'll want to hear your testimony as to the nature of the king's actions. No doubt there's more work for you as well, and payment, of course, for services rendered. No doubt you're tired, though. We will head for Eltuhlich on the morrow, if you're willing. It's a journey that will take several days.
I'm not tired, Tadalak said. I need to use my detection spell to track my pony, Justice Springer, and our horses. We can't just leave them out here alone. Luckily, they're close by. Toril, you want to help me find them? Toril indicated he would love to, but had too much responsibility on his hands, telling him he could take a scout along with him if he'd like. Tadalak agreed and said, Luckily, I think they're only a mile or so away, probably grazing or sleeping maybe. I can tell from the tug on the finger string. He returned an hour or so later with the scout, with the animals in tow. Mordecai, who seemed ill-suited to the direct sunlight, was grateful to be inside the tent and accepted a cot and blanket and was swiftly asleep. Bruckner went in search of a healing tent. He inquired of some soldiers and soon located it. A pavilion with a bright yellow flag streaming in the breeze in front, emblazoned with the sun symbol of Virion, the god of light and health. Once inside, the clerics helped Bruckner out of his breastplate and greaves. Studying the wound, which had only been partially knit by Tadalak's healing wand, an elderly priest pressed a hand to the deep wound left by the tall, bearded devil and began to pray softly in one of the celestial tongues. Bruckner felt a pleasant heat and only a bit of mild pain as the wound began to knit. The clerics healed his other wounds in like manner, one of the young pages scrubbing the blood off of his armor and presenting it to him after the clerics had finished their work, burnished and shining like new. Bruckner washed the blood and grime of battle off of his skin, and the page did his best to clean up his clothing. The swordsman dressed, feeling as refreshed as one might expect on a recently quieted field of battle. He arrived back at their tent to find Nima likewise washed and wearing a fresh outfit of dark blue, and Tadalak returned with the animals. Toril arrived not long after the group had finished their supper of roast venison and onions, to sit with them a spell. They gathered around the campfire, Toril puffing away on a massive ironwood pipe. He revealed a roll of cloth containing 3 smaller pipes and a leather bag of tobacco, offering it around to the group. Bruckner and Tadalak each took one with thanks. Nima demurred.
Well, Jenessen ain't talking,
he said.
We've put him up in a nice pavilion. Men are being gentle with him. He's still a king after all. But he won't say a word about what he's been up to. I put a few questions to him, polite-like, but he wouldn't have none of it. Just as well, I suppose. Ain't my place anyway. I wonder what the general'll make of all this. He's more of a thinking man than me. Anyhow, I reckon we'll know soon enough.
Toril considered Bruckner and Nima for a moment, then said,
It's time I told you outsiders about the broader play of things here in Savar. It ain't exactly pretty. Don't know how much you know as of yet, but, given as we're going to Eltuhlich, you better be prepared.
I hate Eltuhlich. Tadalak burst in unexpectedly, a surprisingly angry expression on his face. Toril nodded seriously.
As well you should, Tadalak. You'll have to keep a low profile there.
Huh. Tadalak is not afraid of those bigots. Toril turned to explain to Bruckner and Nima.
The people of Eltuhlich are, well, mad, truth be told. Lots of them worship Demos, and there's no shortage of acolytes of Cherchez. The blood sports, well, they're more ritual than sport for most. They don't take kindly to wizards and sorcerers there. The king of the city, Sazerkan, well, he's a red dragon. You didn't hear this from me, but he's a dangerous, evil sort. His advisor Nescarillo is running things right now. Sazerkan's been gone for the past year or so. No one knows where. Carillo ain't bad. It was her who talked Sazerkan into lifting the ban on magic users in the city. She's fair-minded enough, though what her true intentions are, I don't know. The general's trying to avoid open hostilities between the cities of Savar, but with all the dust kicked up in Armenia by Jenessen's madness, or enchantment, or whatever it was, that's difficult. The Elts are on edge, and other cities of the region are worried what might happen should Sazerkan return. I know you two saved Jenessen, and you done a right good thing. I also know the general's going to do what he can to avoid regicide. That's where we'll need your testimony. But I doubt Jenessen will ever sit the throne again.
He shrugged, shooting out twin jets of gray smoke from his nostrils and shaking his head.
But what do I know?
Bruckner asked Toril how he thought the succubus could have gotten so close to the king in the first place. Toril looked surprised, as though he hadn't considered the question himself. He ruminated a moment.
Good questions, lad. Good questions. It'd be tough getting into the castle, near enough the king to seduce or enchant him. You reckon should help?
I suppose we will learn more soon enough. Is there something to eat? I am famished.
After the sun had set, Toril passed around a skin of very strong wine. As the strong drink began to sow ease and contentment amongst the adventurers, Tadalak hopped up onto Toril's shoulders and began singing a song entitled The Barefoot Gnome and the Gnome-Footed Bear, a very silly affair that ended with him dumping a second skin of wine over Toril's head. Many of the soldiers had gathered around to listen, and at this they all roared with laughter, crowding to thump Tadalak on the back. Toril himself was laughing so hard he could barely stand up. They all turned in for the night after the merriment. The next morning, the 3 victorious heroes woke to the sound of a trumpet reveille. They roused themselves, performed their morning necessaries and ablutions, and began to gear up for the day's march. "Here, little sister," Tadalak said with a grin, holding out a golden ring to Nima. It was the ruby-set ring they had taken from the devils from the fight the day before. "This is for you. It's a spell-bearing ring, though it hadn't been imprinted with a spell echo, so I took the liberty of casting the enchantment last night. The spell of secret spaces that I cast on you before we rescued the king. I have embedded it into this stone. This is very good, though you must know that it can only be used for a few minutes every day. Then it will need to recharge by starlight." He smiled wickedly and said, "With this, may your dagger find ever more backs." The gnome then skipped over to Bruckner and said, "Here, Ox, this was inside that chest we found. I couldn't pick the lock, but I made friends with a fellow in the army who has a knack for it. I just had to give him a few silvers to do it." Tadalak gestured to the now open chest. It contained a burnished, gleaming breastplate forged from a reddish metal. "A breastplate of nullfire. Now you won't get hit by so many baddies, Ox." After they had breakfasted, Toril appeared, surrounded by 3 pages, asking questions and making preparations. There was much hustle and bustle as the army dismantled tents and made ready to march. Toril asked,
"You three ready to go? We have a hard day's ride ahead."
The group took part in the breaking of camp and were soon bidding a not-so-fond farewell to Mount Ellisbor, riding south hard. The journey passed uneventfully enough, a welcome change after the past few days of darkness, tangible evil, and death. Bruckner had troubled dreams, and Tadalak sometimes called out in his sleep. Nima's prayer beads were rarely far from hand, though she seemed less affected by the recent events. 3 days full of hard riding passed by wearily, with brief respites for meals and short breaks for sleep, never more than 5 hours at a stretch. On the afternoon of the third day, the group spied the mighty brass gates of Eltuhlich ahead. The host thundered across Jardaman's bridge as the sun was setting behind the north spire of Sazrakan's fortress. The bridge they crossed was a mighty structure of scalloped brass spanning high above the city moat, full of poisoned bog water and fell, slithering things that never came up for air. The dying orange sunlight was shining behind the burnished city, making details hard to see. The city was positioned along the southern bank of the Bay of Savar, and the air was cool coming off the water, a welcome relief after 3 hot and dusty days of riding and camping. As they entered the city, Bruckner was struck by the deep copper-red color of the walls. Numerous sentry towers were spanned across and around the city structures, and only through one massive gate, a structure easily 40 feet across and 80 high, could admittance into the city be gained. The door stood open and the portcullis halfway raised. Sentries at the gate studied the incoming troops warily. The air was moist and full of the scent of the wetlands. As the marsh smell became more noticeable, Tadalak spoke up, saying, "The Spantian Marsh is just to the other side of the city. They let a bit of it out into the moat. It's a nasty place, though actually Tadalak prefers the swamp to the snakes who live in the city." The road they now traveled was sturdy, but it appeared to be engaged in a constant battle against creeping vines, tangling weeds, and clawing growing things creeping up from the wet banks of the bay. Amongst the old limestone blocks were newer stones peppered here and there, replacing, no doubt, old stones worn away by the wet and the plant life. The host rode through outer Eltuhlich, arriving after a journey of some minutes along wide and largely empty streets at the gates to the inner city. The guards were hard-looking men, dressed in full plate, resting their hands on the pommels of drawn greatswords, their tips planted in the ground between their feet. Wild palms grew in small pockets of bubbly marsh water, allowed to peep through the gleaming copper streets and brass byways of the city. The towers of the inner city ahead gleamed in many colors, white domes and blue spires surging up into the hazy orange sky. The convoy stopped at the entrance, and they watched as Toril spoke with the guards. The king was riding a horse near the front of the convoy. His hands were unbound, but he was closely flanked by 2 guards. They were soon moving again and finally through the gates and into the inner city proper. The last rays of dying orange light illuminated a vast marketplace or bazaar on the other side of the wall. Merchants selling expensive-looking fabrics and carpets, apothecaries hawking filters and potions, and smiths with weapon stands, all were offering goods at prices they no doubt deemed reasonable. Once inside, Toril circled back to find the 3 of them.
"Tadalak, look after these 2, won't you?"
he said, keeping a close watch on the men moving the king.
"I've got to go and see the general. You can stay in the army encampment in the south of town if you like, though you might enjoy nicer accommodations. Here."
He tossed Tadalak a purse full of jingling gold coins.
"Go get yourself some rooms at the Hidden Hawk Inn. Tell him Toril sent you. It's a nice place, and fairly close to where the army is. Come down tomorrow to report to the general. He'll want to hear your story for himself. There's plenty to do in town while you're here, including a message board for people looking to hire adventurers. You'll find it in the town center. Though,"
he looked at them seriously,
"you'd do best to stay away from the palace, and really, the whole west side of town. Them Sarzakan's people, and they're dangerous folk."
This has been episode 6 of Greenleaf and the Black Blade. Written, narrated, and edited by Andrew Israelsen. Additional voices by Jared Israelsen, Penny James, and Z Tanner. Music by Patrick Grafton Cardwell. Please tune in next time.